All right, hello everyone, and welcome back. We'll open up what I guess is the second half of our course, or the second unit of our course, since we have two major papers. And we'll talk about, before we even begin the readings for this unit, so to speak, we'll begin by looking at the second assignment, which will also be the last major paper for the course. And that is what I call the life form paper, or the life form narrative essay. You can see how long it'll be here, 5 to 6 pages, double spaced, same amount of grade as the first paper. And it will be, you'll see this if you scroll down, I won't scroll down now, but there's also a reflection paper attached to it. That will be everything that your first reflection paper was, but also a few extra questions because there are some very specific things, specific rhetorical strategies I want you to apply in this assignment. If the first paper was when we were analyzing rhetoric, this is the paper where you're applying it to yourself. So you're not just analyzing other people's strategies and other people's readings, doing a rhetorical analysis. You're now creating through all of these things. Be they simple things like ethos, pathos, logos, dystopian rhetoric, personification, metaphor, all those things, irony, and also, more importantly, some fairly major psychological theories of persuasion that we haven't read yet, but we'll spend about 4 or 5 days reading, and I'll be asking you to apply those to this paper. So first, let's talk about the paper. I will refer to it as the life form paper. That'll be the easy way to think of it. Although it's fairly narrative, you do have a number of examples on D2L. I've put them up there. See if we've got them here. And there they are. The honeybee is the main one. Has great examples of both the style, all the literary devices, rhetorical devices you can use, how you might want to incorporate research, scientific research, historical research into a voice for this paper. And I have a few other examples as well that I've put up that are also strong examples. I'll say the meat example is in many ways the weakest in that it has transitions that are kind of bumpy. I think the wolf example and the coral reef examples are my second favorites, so to speak, after the honeybee. But you can read any of those to get the gist of what's going on here. So let's take a look at the assignment itself. If this helps you out, here's your situation. You've been hired by an environmental group to write a unique, highly persuasive narrative that blends scientific research with something that the public essentially will find interesting. You can read all of this later. But the gist here is that scientists, as we'll learn, and maybe as you already learned in this course, scientists, science-minded people, the science communities, people who use logic overwhelmingly, really aren't reaching their people. They're not persuading the public or the publics that they want to. And so your task here is to come up with something different that communicates the basis of this scientific research, but does so in a way that might actually change people's mind. So the interesting thing about this, that's why I call it the life form essay. You are being asked to become something. You are being asked to become, any life form that you want. It can be a plant, it can be animal, it can be you can be some type of molecule or microbe. You can be just about anything you want. You can live in rural places. You can be anywhere in the world. You can be in urban places. If you just look at these examples, people have been honeybees, they've been wolves, they've been meat, they've been coral reefs, they've been sugarloaf, they've been the Mississippi River. Somebody said to me, "Can I be water?" I said, "Yes, but in a specific place because water can be so different depending where you are." Right? So you'll see that most of these are fairly specific. Even the honeybee example is taking place in the U.S. mainly in this research. So you might want to think about what region of the world you're in. We'll take a look at a few other papers. I've got a butterfly paper I can show you. I've got everything under this invasive species. Some people want to do invasive species. I had somebody that was milk once, which is a really fascinating paper, industrial milk. And I said, sure, it's eating something alive. And it's part of the ecosystem and it's food, so why not, right? But you have to, here's the interesting thing, if you haven't looked at the examples yet, you have to become this very thing that you are. So you don't write about it in third person, you're first person, and you are writing as a well-read, educated honeybee that has something to say about your existence and the importance of your existence. If you know anything about ecology and environmentalism, you might know that honeybees are actually becoming highly endangered, even though we need them, right? There's only 10% of the bees there was about, I believe, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And this is becoming a pretty big issue. This is a paper that tackled that. But you can see it's written in the first person. We are the honeybees. we's, and there's I, and there's we, and so you are going to be something in this paper. You're going to be a life form. What life form? That's up to you. We'll talk more about how this works when we get back to this. Why do I do this? I've thought about getting rid of this, and students love this assignment when they're done with it for a number of reasons. The main one being, though, related to how to perform research and read research. Students have told me that they have a really easy time understanding, say, the policies that they read from various governments or the proposals from different groups, the things that they normally wouldn't be that interested in, wouldn't know how to feel about when they are an animal. The writer of the Wolf paper that you have online here, this one right here, Josh, wrote out the Wolf paper, and you can read his paper. He said one of the most fascinating things in class a few years back when we had our post-paper talk. He said, "This is the only paper I've written in college where I knew how to feel about everything I read," because he was the wolf, and everything was either for him or against him. For him in a good way, for him in a, well, barely for him, but for him nonetheless, and things that were, extremely disadvantageous to him, or just a little bit disadvantageous, what it might be. But he knew how to feel about everything. It gave him a reading strategy he had never had for research before. So he learned something about reading research and how you need to position yourself and your values when you're reading research. And so I keep this for that as well. And people just found it fun to pretend to be something. So maybe there's that aspect to it too. So your audience, a neutral but informed audience of late high school, college, general public citizens. You're trying to convince them that your life form is important. Maybe environmentalism in general is important. Mainly your life form. And there's a number of ways you can do that. So let's quickly move through those. Here is your role is to choose this. I offer some examples there. What's your research going to be? Well, we'll talk about the types of sources in a minute. Here, one thing you're going to want to do is include a natural history to some extent of your life form. What's that going to be? How you've been treated over the centuries, what an ideal environment is for you, how humankind helps you or hinders you, and that could be by taking away habitat, hurting your food cycle, changing your birthing and mating patterns, all of these type of things. And that could be from the chemicals that humans use to urbanization to different agricultural practices that are intrusive. We have a reading in a few weeks on ecology that's going to introduce the basic issues, although you'll see the basic issues as you read through the model papers, and you'll see what everybody else did. And none of these papers, the model papers, were written by scientists or environmental or ecology majors or anything like that. Most of these are communication majors, English majors. So. And so this is an assignment that will teach you the basics of ecological thinking. And you know all this stuff just from being a citizen that grew up watching nature documentaries, et cetera, et cetera. Here are some good questions, though, to get you going. Are these each a paragraph? Probably not. Do you have to answer all of these? Not necessarily, right? These are just ways to get you thinking about the scientific end of things and where the scientific problems meet public interest, okay? So they don't give you writing strategies, but they do give you things to research, questions you might want to start looking into. Okay, and so you've got all of those there. Here's another way to think of it, kind of the same thing, but different research categories. You can have the historical. Maybe we'll look at examples here. If I pull up, say, Josh's wolf example, you can take a look at this, but you'll see a lot of this in the beginning is historical. He gave a history of how the wolf had been treated in North America and that it's changed over time and looking for best practices. Mainly he was showing a pattern over the centuries of being afraid of the wolf and a non-ecological treatment. Not so different than we saw in some of our previous readings in the course. Eventually, though, the interesting thing is Josh gets to the present, and then he starts to give a critique in the second half of the paper of all the policies that are going on now, the way that different states protect wolves differently or don't protect wolves. And that becomes the second half of his paper. Rather than history, it becomes government policy, the Endangered Species Act, stuff like this. But you can see he's providing a fairly large historical background to show how he's useful to society, but how he has been disadvantaged by his cultural viewpoint or society's viewpoint of wolves, right? There's lots of scientific and ecological stuff. Maybe in another video we can take a look at this, but if we want to take a quick look at, say, our coral reef, This is something from the coral reef paper. I'm a few pages in, the second major impact. Maybe we'll talk about this paper more in a different video. But look at, this is a communication major who told me she didn't really like science much, but she knew that she had to deal with it after she graduated as a communications major. All information, it becomes important and relevant, and you'll have to wrestle with all of it. Look at all of this scientific information that she went and read and had to figure out in this assignment about coral reefs. But more importantly, what this paper does really well, if you give it a read, and you probably should, is it pulls out of this scientific stuff and says, okay, here is the point of all of this science. And that's, of course, what good communicators do. And we'll learn from our readings that when scientists talk too much about science, they lose the public, they confuse the public. And more so, you've got to boil it down to some few simple takeaway points and things that people can do, behavior changes, simple behavior changes that aren't overwhelming. And this paper is really good at doing that. So you'll see some heavy-duty science from a not science major, but then wrapped up eventually inside of, and I've got them highlighted here, what it all means to people, right? And so this paper does a really good job of that, as does the honeybee model, which you will be reading, okay? So you can see that the scientific or ecological always exists there. You'll see in the honeybee paper, in the coral reef paper, and in others, the economic, commercial, or potential threats, when this is treated, when the life form is treated as a resource, when you, whatever life form you are, treated as a resource, something to be hunted, something to be used, something to be traded, something can become a commodity, and a price can be attached to it, right? So you can deal with that. You probably want to deal with all of these at least a little bit. Some maybe more so than others, depending what the greatest threat to you is, right? So that will depend on what your life form choice is. You'll have to figure all this out by reading, of course. And then environmentalism, social activist, conservationist discourses or rhetorics. Who's trying to help you, right? And how well are they doing? How are they doing it? If we think of this as a course on rhetoric, are the people trying to help you using the best communication techniques? Well, once we've read the papers, the research over the next week to start this paper, you'll start to see whether or not the groups out there are actually using the type of techniques that might persuade people to help you to change their behavior. Probably not logos, probably not to a great extent apocalyptic rhetoric. So if they're using those, you could actually critique, you as a life form, could critique what your social activists that are trying to help you, what they're actually doing wrong. If they would just read the research on how to persuade people, maybe they could help you more. And your life form could point that out, of course. Other bullet points, as long as you're here talking about the assignment. The public communication frameworks, here's the way this works. You've got one that is required. It says 4 required. One all of you will do, and you have a choice from our readings of the 3 others. The one that is required, and it says this elsewhere, is that when you argue for protecting the environment, don't say that something is good for the environment. You have to argue through a human health framework. Saving this ecosystem or protecting this ecosystem helps humans because, or protects humans from something going wrong because. So one of the frameworks I want you to get used to using in this class is arguing for everything inside of human terms. As we'll see in the research, multiple articles that we'll read will show that people are more persuaded to care about the environment, not through arguing purely for the environment for its own sake, but by arguing that it's linked to human health. And so that's one I definitely need to see in the paper when you write it. You'll have to figure out, you have to answer that question in your research. How does my life form become good for the sustainability of human life? Right, so that's one, and then you'll have plenty of others that you'll get to use too, and you can choose 3 from any of our other readings coming up. You will need one counter argument as well, so what people might say against you, and you'll kind of want to debunk that, as you always do with counter argument. Here are the types of sources. 2 of the 6 will be lengthy sources, a book chapter or a peer-reviewed paper. You will write a 2-source annotated bib that summarizes those. The rest, though, can just be professional organizations' websites, well-researched journalism, the stuff that's floating around out there on the web most likely, mainly probably social activist research. So the Sierra Club and other groups specific to your life form that are trying to save you. They don't have to be from the US, they may be from anywhere in the world, right? So those are going to be a lot of the sources for this. That's where you're going to find your best info and facts and stuff like that, and when you can analyze public strategies. You're free to use any of the readings from the course that we read as a group, but you can't cite those as a source in your paper. Down here I'm just saying, here are the different types of frameworks I want you to use for your 4 frameworks. One is human health. You'll need to choose 3 more. In the next video then, I'm going to just analyze briefly a couple of the papers so you can get a taste of those as well. Thank you.